Hey.
Alrighty, guys, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Again, if you joined after I just said that, we are in a webinar format, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, I'll be quiet, Eric.
All righty, everyone. So the agenda for today, Jordan and I are gonna do a quick introduction, and then we're gonna go through some of the research that was done. This is from both the listening sessions and the follow-up survey, and then we're gonna walk through some of the new programs that are coming in response to all the work that has been done so far. And then we'll talk a little on Jordan will talk a little bit about on-ramp, and then we'll wrap up. And are always excited to hear comments and questions and feedback. So we'll be keeping an eye on the chat for that. Alrighty, so hello, hi, it's us, Jordan and Eric. I am the grants and research manager at the Arts Commission, so work with a lot of the grants administration and then also the research efforts, and a lot of this fell on the research side of my role, and was really excited to join you all and meet you all throughout this process. Jordan, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure, I'm Jordan Adams. Some of you may know both of us, some of you may know neither of us because we had other facilitators at the listening sessions, but I am the Artist Services Program Manager. With the needs assessment, I did a lot of the planning, logistics, facilitation of the assessment. I do want to shout out our four facilitators that we didn't add, but those facilitators, we've chatted with them, and so they were a great help to this process as well.
Yeah, so I outlined the team here that was all involved. Some of these people you met as facilitators, like Jordan mentioned, and some you may not have, as we were trained by the Tamarack Foundation to learn how to facilitate some of those sessions. And then we also had some research help from both Dr. Elaine Grogan-Luttrell and Natalie Larson. So we're grateful for the whole team for making this happen. And the goal with all of this, as you all know, is to provide an opportunity for artists to network with peers, voice opinions, concerns, and needs that inform and elevate their unique experience as Indiana creatives. And so, to that end, just as a refresher for the conversations that we had about a year ago at this point, which is crazy, year flew by. We talked about sort of six core questions throughout the listening sessions. And some of these questions may have been asked directly, and some of these may have been sort of insinuated or just weaved in throughout the conversation. But we were focusing on what comes to mind when it means what you think about career, having a career as an artist, what strategies would be effective in promoting the work of local artists and throughout the region. What does meaningful community support look like? What does being fully supported look like just beyond financially, extending into that relationship piece as well? How have institutions helped or hindered your artistic career? What does financial wellness look like? And what makes you feel valued as an artist? And so these are big questions that we dug into all together. And we had a lot of participation throughout this process. About 150 artists participated in the listening session portion. Ages ranged from 16 to 97. You're reading that right. It was actually 16 to 97. It was really wonderful to meet so many different artists with different backgrounds. About 36% were rural, 64% metropolitan, 31% identified as BIPOC. And then we had about 59% female, 38% male, and 3% non-binary. So a lot of different artists participating, also from a lot of different disciplines as well, predominantly fine art, photography, music, and design disciplines. And these disciplines were selected because these are disciplines that have public data available, and we tried to make sure the listening sessions were reflective of the variety of artists and people that are in the state of Indiana. So at the end of the day, we had about 400 pages of transcribed feedback from our conversations. You remember, we recorded all those conversations. And so Natalie and I have poured over those transcripts and analyzed them. And a lot of them, most of it came into sort of one of these five buckets or key themes and findings. And some of these may sound familiar from the conversations that we had about a year ago. First one being networks and connection. In the listening sessions, we heard a lot from people about how valuable it is to have spaces that are curated for artists to build relationships with each other, to network with each other. There are a number of sessions where people were in the room together and had lived a couple blocks away and had no idea the other person was a local practicing artist. And even just the listening sessions themselves, I think, served as a wonderful evidence of the power of getting to meet other artists and other creative people from a variety of different disciplines as well. So that definitely stuck out as something that was emphasized throughout our conversations. Another one was marketing support. A lot of people talked about the need for local marketing support. Social media as a challenge came up a lot. How do we navigate social media? How do we continue to build an audience and build engagement, particularly for artists who maybe don't live close to a large metropolitan area as well? Sort of the decline of local newspapers and local media outlets also factored in here. And so there's a lot of conversation around how do we build an audience and how can we leverage local resources to promote the work of local artists. Another big one that came up was tension between creativity and financial stability. I think most of the people in the listening sessions had a part-time job or piecing things together to be able to sustain their artistic career, and they weren't necessarily full-time artists per se. They were doing a lot of different things to make it work, and so constantly there was a lot of feedback around trying to balance those things and meeting that financial stability, having insurance and benefits, while also wanting to pursue more fully your creative disciplines. So that was definitely a theme throughout the conversations. Another one that came through was local government and organizations playing a really big role on artists' careers. There are a number of people who talked about, particularly artists who were at a more advanced career stage, talked about getting early career opportunities that were offered through the city or in partnership with local businesses that really set them off in a trajectory that led to a really meaningful career, being able to spend more time in their art. And so that was something that really came out a lot, and also wanting to be recognized, receive that recognition in local support as well. Some people talked about not really feeling the level of local support they had hoped until they made it big somewhere else, and then their local community was acknowledging them. And so really recognizing the importance of acknowledging your local creatives and the local art by those local institutions like arts organizations and local government came through as a really prominent theme. And last but certainly not least, was a lot of the feedback, particularly unpacking that first question around what does it mean to have a career as an artist. We had a lot of great discussions on that, and a lot of it was framed by this intersection of identity and career. So what was your upbringing like? How did your family view your career or interest in the arts, or how were the arts perceived to you growing up? What level of access did you have to the arts as a kid through your school system or through your education? And so a lot of those relationships and those perspectives came through and how people thought about what it meant to have a career as an artist. And so that was another important piece, I think, that came out of these conversations. So we took all of this feedback and we built off of that a survey that went out to the entire state that was publicly available to sort of cast a wide net and get some feedback on some of the themes and findings and needs that had been articulated in the listening sessions. And so this was a broader pool, had 581 responses from Indiana artists. 70% of Indiana counties were represented, and about a little over 20% were artists that live in a rural county, which about tracks with the state population. So we're going to run through some of the findings from this and the responses. The IAC has 11 different regions. I know it would hop from 10 to 12. We don't have a region 11. It's a long story. We could talk about it later. But this sort of tracks the survey responses and then overlays the Indiana population. And the one thing I want to note in here for folks is you see that tall bar, number 7 there. That's Central Indiana. That includes Indianapolis. And what I want you to focus on is the fact that the orange line and the blue line are at the same spot. And that's important because that means that the number of people who responded from the Indianapolis, Central Indiana area was on par with the percentage of the population that's in that area. In other words, there wasn't an outsized number of people from the Indianapolis area responding to this survey, which is really important to note because that can often sometimes be the case with work like this. Here's the responses broken down by individual county. The darker the color means there were more responses in that area to this public survey. Without surprise, you can see some darker counties where there are cities like Indianapolis, Bloomington, Columbus, Fort Wayne, South Bend, which is what you'd typically expect to see with some pockets without responses. Okay. In the survey, as you may remember, we asked people to identify their career stage as an artist, and we defined what those terms meant. And about 40% identified as emerging artists, about 10% of respondents identified as hobby artists, about 28% identified as scaling, and 22% identified as sustaining. And one thing I want to note here is that 90% of artists are bringing in some level of income from their work. They're making some level of revenue from their artistic product, which was really interesting to see. We asked people, do you consider yourself an entrepreneur or small business owner? And overwhelmingly, people said yes. 60% said yes. Another quarter said no, and 15% were unsure. And then we followed up with people's engagement with Indiana Small Business Development Centers, which is one of the most widely accessible small business development centers that the state or small business supports that the state offers. And overwhelmingly, people said, we don't know what SBDCs are. Never heard of them. I know of them, but have never accessed their resources. And so this is an interesting juxtaposition that the survey revealed, was that a lot of people identified as small business owners. A lot of people are making money from their artwork in some way, yet the most ubiquitous small business resource is not known or accessed in a meaningful way. So this is something this was a big takeaway from the survey. Here were the responses by artistic discipline. You'll note that these are the same categories that I showed you during the listening session slide that had the same disciplines here. A lot in the fine art category, and sort of a division around the 10 to 15% range among all the other categories. And we know these aren't perfect categories, and it's hard to necessarily always pick one as well. So this is a bit of an imperfect setup in some ways, but it does give you a general sense of who was responding to this survey. We asked artists, what types of local organizations and groups are you connected with and support you as a practicing artist? And a lot lean on local arts nonprofits, art associations and clubs, and local businesses. Those were overwhelmingly the predominant institutions that people leaned on for support. Again, you see small business development centers are at the very bottom. People are not really accessing a lot of those small business resources in a meaningful way. And so that's something to keep in mind, especially as you hear about some of the things that Jordan has to say about new programmatic offerings coming down the pipe. There are some people in the other category, I just want to note, that talked a lot about their religious life and their church as being a major outlet for creative activity, as well as family and friends. Okay, so now we're going to move into some of the needs that were conveyed. So we took the listening session feedback and sort of distilled it into these 5 overarching primary needs that developed from those conversations. And then we put them in the survey and asked people to rank them. 1, that light green color being most important, and to 5, that light blue color being least important. So it's all relative to the other things that are in this list. They're all important. I think we can all probably recognize that these are all needs and are all important needs, but there are choices to be made. And so we wanted to get a sense of what was rising to the top as being most pressing in this moment. And what came across the group as a whole was financial support and education. There's this tension between creativity and financial stability, and needing more support in that space. Local investment and local artists kind of came in second. I look at the light green and the orange bar combined. I think that's usually your best indicator of how important was this, because that is both people that says first most important, or second most important. So I look at those 2 bars combined to get a sense of how much of a priority this is. And so that was also closely followed by marketing support and education, and affordable and accessible space. So we also broke this out by geography. And you'll see here, among rural artists, marketing support and education was a higher priority among rural artists than it was from our metropolitan-based artists, or just the group as a whole. So that's something to note. And networks and connection was also a little bit higher in this space as well. Among metropolitan-based artists, financial support and education was also at the top, similar to the group as a whole. Among hobby artists, so now this is broken out by career stage. You can see that affordable and accessible space was much higher. This was also pretty small, the smallest group of career stage that responded were hobby artists, but you can see that affordable and accessible space was pretty important to them. in addition to networks and connection. Among emerging artists, networks and connection was actually the highest, which would make sense when you think about this, the career stage of being at an emerging artist. The network piece is really important to getting into that next stage. And so that was a highly valued piece among this group in particular. Um, and I think I duplicated a slide, so apologies. Are they all duplicated? Am I just going through here? There we go. Scaling artists. This group really valued financial support and education. This was the group that valued this the most out of any other career stage group. And this is something that I think we heard in the listening sessions as well from people that were more advanced in their career stage, that really diving into the business side and the financial stability side was a critical next step or a critical piece for them right now. Okay, and then this is sustaining artists. And again, financial support and education. These are people that are a little bit more advanced in their career, also emerged as a top priority, closely followed by local investment and local artists. So really wanting more contribution and activity from your local institutions, local businesses, local governments, local nonprofit organizations. Okay, now within each primary need, we asked people about specific resources or responses to that need and asked people to rank them. So again, these are all relative. These are all could be helpful resources or beneficial to a certain extent, but we wanted to know which things were rising to the top for people. So within networks and connection, mentorship opportunities and connections rose to the top as being the high priority piece within networks and connection. That was what people were looking for. Among hobby artists, it was recurring artist meetups. That was something that they were looking for. Among emerging artists, the mentorship connections and opportunities were by far the most requested, with over 60% of them saying this is most important or second most important. For scaling artists, again, it was mentorship connections and opportunities, but closely followed behind recurring artist meetups and networking. And you can see how those two are sort of related as well, kind of following along similar lines there. Among sustaining artists, same situation. And then we move on to the next category, which is marketing, education, and support. And in this one, I'm not going to break it down into career stage because it pretty much looks like this graph among every career stage, which was we need local resources and platforms to promote artists in the community. You can see here over 80% said this was the most important or second most important. And this was one of the most clear pictures that we had in this survey. There was not much disagreement here. And certainly not many people are interested in finding independent contractors to support marketing efforts. So sorry, all those marketing consultants out there. The demand is low right now. Among financial support and education, business planning and operations training was up there pretty high among all career stages, as was support for equipment and material purchasing. Those were the two big pieces. Interestingly, access to health insurance and wellness resources and emergency funding fell as a lower priority in the survey. This was talked about a little bit more in the listening sessions. So there's a little bit of a difference here. And again, these are selected and ranked based on the other choices that are there. So it doesn't mean that these aren't important, but relative to the other choices people had in this list, they ranked a little bit lower. Among hobby artists, you can see that picture coming through. Support for equipment and material purchasing, business planning, really important. Same thing with emerging artists. Those same two are at the top. Same for scaling and sustaining as well. Local investment in local artists, institutional opportunities, prioritizing local artists was the one that really came through. Artists were looking for their institutions to provide them an open door to really take the next step in their career and wanted to feel supported in that way. And so that was generally followed by small business support, having collaborations with small businesses in the community and being able to access that network as well. Some of the repeated needs that were typed in were grant writing, access to more capital opportunities. Affordable space was mentioned in the comments a lot, even though it fell lower in the ranking of needs. And I didn't go through that one because it actually ended up being ranked as a really low priority among folks once the survey came out. And so we didn't go through that in this. If you're interested in the specific numbers, please feel free to reach out and we can walk through those. In the interest of time, moving on from the affordable space piece at the moment. But that was definitely something that continued to come through in conversation. It just didn't necessarily make it to the top of the list in the survey among the ranking pieces. Networks and connections were reiterated a lot in the fill-in responses as for marketing assistance. Some of the other needs that came out that were not among that list was navigating taxes, DEAI initiatives, and professional development opportunities. So some of the key just overarching takeaways from the survey is that the career stage, as you can see, has a significant impact on what people were looking for. The hobby artists, emerging artists wanted different things than scaling and sustaining artists. And so all that to say, there is not a one-size-fits-all program or response that will satisfy the needs that are out there right now. And so it's important to keep in mind that responses need to be tailored to the group and the career stage people are at. Local arts organizations are a really vital resource in the community for artists, and they can play a really big role in helping support artists' careers. Rural artists certainly valued networks and connection equally to financial support and education. So they valued that network piece a little bit more than the metropolitan artists did on whole. And artists at a more advanced career stage ranked networks and connections as less important compared to people that were earlier in their career stage. So that's just a little bit more evidence showing about the sort of different needs at different stages in your career. It was really great to see that a lot of artists are generating some level of revenue from their work, and a majority of artists viewing themselves as entrepreneurs and small businesses. And so financial support and education naturally starts to rise to the top as a primary need to sustain that. And local marketing platforms really stood out in this survey as a highly desired resource and something to note and keep an eye on. And that is what I have from the survey. So I will hand it over to Jordan to talk about what we're going to do with these findings and how we're going to respond to them.
Thank you. Alrighty. If you feel free going through the slides for me. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, guys. So with that, that was a great cue up because, like you said, there's not just one standard program that can address all those needs. So with that being said, we've kind of designed a total of 6 programs in 2 different suites, one being on community building and the other on business development. And so I'm going to go through each of those programs and kind of give you the quick and fast of what those programs will contain. I don't know why I pushed the arrow like I could do it. Habit. Thank you. Alrighty, so our first program is Work in Progress Exchange Labs. What need does this program meet? It is going directly to the network and connection. It is for primarily emerging artists, and the 3 main components of the program are their micro support groups that meet monthly. We'll kind of go into the details a little bit later on what that looks like. They're led by group artists, so kind of speaking back to the mentoring aspect, and then simple 90-minute agenda format. So again, very informal meetup session for folks. And so there is a grant component to it. It's a micro grant available for $250 to $1,000. And again, I'll go into the details of what that all includes. So the second program in the first suite is local liaisons, kind of getting that local investment in local artists. It's for all artists. These local liaisons will be an arts advocate for the non-arts community in that area. It will be fulfilled either by a local artist or an arts organization who excels in individual artist development and resources. And then this local liaison will also manage the first program that we just talked about, and then the iteration of on-ramp that we'll talk about as well. And then town hall meetings is the last program in the first community development aspect. So this speaks to both marketing support and education and financial support and education. Again, it's for all artists. This will be a virtual webinar series that kind of replaces our regularly scheduled webinars if you've attended them in the past. There'll be a 5-point agenda that kind of speak to different topics that we kind of coalesce together for you all, and they will be both non-technical and creative story topics. So thinking of taxes as well as inspiration and creativity. So both of those types of topics will be in the town hall meetings as well. So for Suite B, thinking of business development, the first program will be the Creative Business Strategy Series. It speaks to 3 different needs: marketing and financial support and education, as well as local access, sustaining and scaling artists. So this will be a virtual 6-week series. It will be in the format of a cohort, and we will be talking about strategic energy into existing businesses. So again, for sustaining and scaling artists. And those businesses can be either directly creative small businesses or a business that supports or serves artists. So think of your galleries, your theaters, things of that nature. And there will be a $1,000 honorarium for those individuals in that cohort to kind of put towards anything that they've identified they need to speak to their strategy. The Get It Going series is also a virtual series, again, speaking to marketing and financial support and education and local access. This is for emerging artists. So think of creative business strategy. If you're familiar with our on-ramp program, that's a follow-up to on-ramp, kind of people who have, figured out the business, but they're a little stuck. And the Get It Going is a pre-on-ramp. So this is thinking of startup tasks for your creative business. And again, in a 15 to 20 artist cohort. And there's a $1,500 honorarium for any startup costs that are identified as well. And then lastly, in our business development is Ramp Up. And so this is speaking to marketing support and financial support and education, local access. This is for established artists. It is a 1-year fellowship with a non-arts company, infusing reciprocal innovation to both the company and the artist. And IAC and the selected companies will kind of co-design a suitable role for that individual. It will go far past graphic design, mural. It will go past that. It will be really something that builds the artist as well as the company as well. And then this will be a full-time salary. I'm sorry, Eric. You don't have to go back. There'll be a full-time salary with part-time hours. The salary component is the full-time hours, but the part-time, you will only work part-time with that company, and the other part of your role will be just your artistry, using that time to build into your artistry and then inspire you to come back to that company with new innovative ideas. Okay, so you're like, Jordan, are you going to open all these programs right now? No, I'm not. I'm not crazy. So, but we have these rolling out in the next 3 years. This first year in 2025, the Exchange Labs and the Creative Business Strategy will be up first. And then in 2026, we will start with local liaisons and the Get It Going series. And then in 2027, we'll talk about the Town Hall series as well as On-Ramp, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then Ramp Up as well. And we'll talk about the specifics for year 2025 too. So for the work in progress exchange labs, these will be the jurisdictions for the meetup groups. They will move across each of the areas. What you see here is where you see these numbers are our existing service regions, but we've kind of grouped them so that there is more opportunity to network across your district, if you will. And these will be the counties that are in those districts, but it will move across each district as well. This is the artist eligibility, kind of basic standard things that we kind of have to say who can participate. But most notably is the 2 to 7 years in these artistic disciplines. Again, we want people who are not necessarily hobbyists, but have some start in their practice so that the group can move kind of efficiently and support one another in that area. Oh, sorry. So the registration for those groups will open in the next month or so, and you can stay tuned to our newsletters to see when those registrations open. And we'll kind of talk to the point of why registration for those groups are important. So there is a micro grant. There is evaluation criteria for that. You should have registered and attended at least one lab to be eligible for micro grant. There will be a application via our founded or online grant system. And then you will just need to express the reason these funds are being requested, any known expenses, um, how you will utilize them in the next 5 months, and then how this connects to your artistic career. There will be 2 cycles, spring and summer, fall, winter. And again, it's a short period because, again, to the name of the program, work in progress, anything that you are actively working on, we want to see you apply these funds immediately. And there will be a final report with that as well. And so these are the two dates and deadlines. Again, once we fully announce it in our newsletters, in our website, you'll have all of this information readily available too. Alrighty, so our next program, Creative Business Strategy Series. So again, this is a 6-week virtual workshop series for a cohort of 15 to 20 artists. And we'll be injecting strategy into these businesses to gain new momentum. We want to focus on the discipline necessary to set goals, to utilize your full business acumen as well. With that being said, these are the weekly curriculum topics. It seems simple, but we're going to hold you accountable to these things and kind of actively work through these things. This will be led by Dr. Elaine Grogan Luttrell, and we will meet via an online platform as well as Zoom. So there will be some kind of precursor work that you need to do before coming to that Zoom class and kind of going through this. So the curriculum itself is the first 4 weeks, and then you'll notice those last 2 check-ins are week 8 and 16. And then we'll be checking in to see if you did achieve those goals or what follow-up help you need to achieve those goals as well. With that being said, you can go to the next slide. Eligibility, I don't know how that happened, but the general eligibility is the same as before, but then the program-specific eligibility requirements, the business needs to be operating in existence for a minimum of 5 to 10 years. They need to provide proof of consistent revenue and profitability. The profitability only needs to be in the last 1 or 3 years. And then it doesn't need to increase over time. It could be consistent profitability. And then you'll need to provide proof of profitable existing records and customer systems so that you can readily access them during the classes as well. And not kind of prohibit anybody's progress in those classes too. Again, the applications for that will open in February. There is an honorarium again, but this is not a prescriptive grant. We're not asking for you to accomplish any specific thing with this money, but we will split the payment in $500 payments at both of those check-ins to make sure that you come back and we can hold you accountable to those goals that you've had as well. So with that being said, those are the 2 programs that are starting up next. So let's talk about what that means for on-ramp. And if you are a current or former on-ramper or looking to apply for on-ramp, we are pausing it for the 2025 year. It did start in 2018 with the first cohort. If you notice, we skipped 2020 because of what happened with COVID. But because we paused in 2020, when 2021 came back, there were 1 central cohort that was from the 2020 year, and then there were several local cohorts as well within that year. And then we've kind of followed the continued general central cohort model. But what we're looking to do is evaluate in 2025. In 2026, we'll train those local liaisons to be able to carry out the local cohorts. And in 2027, we'll return with our last central cohort. and then the return of the local cohorts in those areas as well. Okay, so with that being said, the request for qualifications for consultants that will evaluate the program will be going live in the winter of this year. And then we'll kind of share out the results of that and kind of apply it to the trainings and what the new iteration of Ormond looks like for the last central cohort and the local cohorts as well. Okay. With that being said, that is the plan. We're going to take this time for any questions that you may have. Um, Feel free to put them in the chat. I think you can, or I can allow, you can raise your hand. I can allow you to talk as well. While we wait for any questions that we may have, just thank you for participating in those listening sessions. We really appreciated it. And we appreciate you guys being invested to see what's going on and attending this call as well. Ooh, may not have any.
If any questions come, Jordan, you could share. I can't access the chat to the attendees, but you could share our emails in there. And if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out or contact us. We're hoping that these programs really connect to the feedback that we heard, and that they really respond to some of the things um, that were coming up in those conversations. So we really appreciate it and value that feedback. I want to make sure you see it manifested in some of these investments.
Eric, can you go to the last slide? I do want to tell you of ways to stay engaged with us. Um, There is, if you are not already, I'm sure you guys are because you're here. If you're not subscribed to our newsletter already, please do so because a lot of the announcements for registration for the exchange labs as well as the creative business strategy will come through there. We're also revamping our artist services hub, so stay tuned for that announcement as well. And then we just share general professional development in that newsletter as well. Okay. Not seeing any questions, but to echo Eric, if you have any, please feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email. Okay. I think we're gonna sign off then. Thank you guys.
Thank you all.